Hello and namaste. Welcome back to Global Desi Women. I'm your host, Arti Solanki, a real estate broker, business coach, a strong believer in sharing stories that inspire, educate, empower women in our community from all around the globe. Today's topic is from family trauma to finding your voice. And our guest today is Harita Gandhi, a proud Gujarati woman from New Zealand whose life, it's both the strength and the complexity of growing up between cultures. She's the first generation born in New Zealand, and we're going to get into her story, her voice. We appreciate her coming up on our Global Desi Women podcast and sharing her journey. So, welcome, Harita.
Thanks for having me.
To get started, I guess we can start out with being a first generation Gujarati in New Zealand. How was your experience?
Yeah. To make that a little bit more complicated, I'm first generation New Zealand born on my dad's side, but
Mm,
third generation New Zealand born on my mum's side.
okay.
So I've written some notes down so that I don't forget the main points. But so on my mum's side, my great grandfather came to New Zealand in 1920, literally, on a boat as people migrated back then.
Yeah.
I was told that, his boat trip was about 3 months long from India to New Zealand. So he came from Nalsari in Gujarat to Wellington back then. So yeah, on my mum's side, since my great grandfather, they've all been born in Wellington, but obviously very close to the Indian community and all of that. So my mum was born in 1963, and back then, Indians in New Zealand were still very traditional and they tried to hold on to their roots as much as they could.
Right.
So she had an arranged marriage with my dad in 1984, and she went to India with my grandparents, to meet men,
Right.
decide if they liked each other, and then get married, basically. So I think they met each other, and then within 3 weeks after that, they were married. So my dad was born and brought up in India. He's Gujarati, but he actually grew up in Bombay because that's where my dada used to work. So he's got a lot of Marathi influence in him, even though he's not Marathi himself.
Right.
And he had never left India until he married my mum at the age of 23. And that's when he went from India to New Zealand, as you did back then. A lot of
Right.
Indians basically get married and move out of the
Move
country.
out.
Um, and yeah, so it's a bit of a mix that way in the sense that my mum is like me. She's a Kiwi born New Zealand. She actually sounds a lot like me. If people ring us, they don't know the difference between my voice and her voice, apparently. But my dad's been here for 40 years now. So he's still that mix of Indian and New Zealand, but he's spent most
Right.
of his life in New Zealand now. And he had finished his master's from an English speaking university in Bombay. I can't remember the name of it now, but he had just finished his master's a few months before marrying my mum. Back in the 1980s, and I'm sure it was the same in America and most of the Western world, degrees from India weren't recognized in New Zealand, even if you did your education in English. So my dad went to what is called an English medium school. So English is the predominant language, and then Marathi and Hindi
Hindi is
are
right.
secondary languages taught in schools. But he couldn't find a job in New Zealand in his field when he moved here. His master's was actually in physics, so he's
Mm-mm.
so smart, so much smarter than I ever will be. He couldn't find a job in New Zealand when he moved here in 1984. So he ended up working in a factory doing shift work. And I can't even imagine how demoralizing that is for a well
Right.
educated person from India who's 23, who's packed up their whole life to move to the other side of the world for their wife,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And my mum used to work in a government department where she had always worked after she'd left
Mm.
what we call college. I think you'd call it high school.
Right.
Yeah, my parents bought a convenience store in 1986 because, for the few years my dad was working in a factory, he was still applying for jobs in his field, but he couldn't find anything. He was told he'd have to go back to university to study again. And, he just couldn't be bothered with all of that. And then this a good opportunity came up where a convenience store was for sale not far away from where my parents were living, and they saw a lot of potential in it. So they bought it in 1986. And after I was born in 1988, then my mum quit her job at the government department and decided to work full time in the shop because the shop was quite big and it basically needed two full time staff because the
Right.
business was growing quite well. So my brother and I both grew up working in the shop after school, weekends, school holidays, etc.
Oh,
Because the shop was open 7 days a week,
wow. That must have been
12:30.
really, yeah, that must
Yeah.
have been really difficult. And growing up for you guys and also for your parents, as, managing both the business and the kids.
Kind of older. I've seen both sides of it. The pros are you can literally take your kids to work every day,
Right.
where most office jobs you can't.
Don't do that. Yeah.
And my brother and I think we learnt a lot of good skills just by working in the shop, stocking
Yeah.
shelves, serving customers, seeing how our parents do things in the shop. It kind of made us both naturally quite
It gives you the business mindset right from the beginning, right? It just
yeah.
helps you build that.
Yeah, whereas the cons were, I guess, it was a 7 days a week business because the shop was in a residential suburb, so most of the busy times are outside of your typical office hours,
Right.
weekends, early morning, late in the evening. So the cons are that the 4 of us could hardly ever go out as a family together unless it was after 8 o'clock at night. So quite often it would be my mum, me, and my brother that would go places, and my dad would be in the shop by himself. Or sometimes my dad would come with us, and my mum would stay in the shop by herself
So,
because,
would that have made more difficult upbringing as, getting the Indian culture, passing on that culture to the kids, to you guys? Was that a difficulty, or did your parents ensure that you guys were raised with, you knew the
yeah,
language, you knew Bollywood, you knew, you had the touch of our culture?
yeah. So, yeah, that's a good question. So, I think my parents were really smart with how they made sure my brother and I learnt and retained our culture. So, just for a bit of context, my brother's almost 6 years younger than me, so I'm the older sibling by quite a bit. And I was actually quite lucky that my Foy, my dad's younger sister, actually lived with us until I was 4. So my parents had called her over from India because in the hopes of, she'd wanted to settle down in New Zealand. And she's quite a bit younger than my dad. So I think she was 18 when she came to New Zealand and she lived with us until I was 4. And in India, she didn't go to an English medium school. She went to a Hindi Marathi based school, I think.
Right.
I know she definitely didn't go to an English medium school, just for context here. So her
Yeah.
English wasn't that great when she moved to New Zealand. So the education she'd had was quite different to the education my dad had because I think back then as well, parents invested
Yeah.
more in the son's education than the daughter's education as well. This we're talking about 1960s India, 19 even so when my foy came to New Zealand, her English was very limited. Like, she basically learnt English after she came to New Zealand.
Mm.
And because she lived in our house, everything at home was just naturally in Gujarati because that's what my foy and dad and mum spoke to each other in. And
Right.
even though my mum's New Zealand-born Indian, but she speaks Gujarati fluently, but English obviously comes more naturally to
More
her.
naturally, yeah.
The dynamics at home were just that we just spoke in Gujarati because my foy was here at the time. And
Right.
also, so I just grew up in that, and I grew up listening to Gujarati every day. Whenever we'd go to the shop, my dad, mum, and foy would be talking to each other in Gujarati there as well. Obviously, my dad talks in English to the customers, but it was in the
Right.
family, Gujarati. So I actually only learned English when I started kindergarten when I was 3.
Yeah.
And
I think most of the kids abroad, that's how it is. Like even my
yeah,
kids, they started speaking English,
yeah,
I would say fluently after they started kindergarten, but at home it was a mix of English and Gujarati, like you said, because living with our parents and us, we try to speak in Gujarati at home. So I think that's how the kids pick up the language, and it makes it easier for them. But does that also mean that, with the mixed culture, being born in New Zealand and having our Indian culture, how did you feel it? Did the mixed culture kind of made it more difficult for you when starting the school, or was it easier?
So a bit of both. And I think a lot of Indians or a lot of ethnic people that grow up in the Western world naturally just learn how to code switch without actually thinking too much about it. You just know at home, we're Indian. Out of
Yeah.
the home, out of the home, we're Western. It just happens naturally. Like, I have this one vivid memory from when I was at kindergarten. I don't remember anything else from my time at kindy except once, and this must have been in my first few days of kindy, when I realized I was speaking a different language to everyone in my kindy. And I was trying to tell the teacher or some of the other kids at kindy what I wanted to do or something, and the teacher told me off. The teacher was also, ironically, a New Zealand-born Indian, so she understood what I was saying because I was speaking in Gujarati, and she said to me, "Harita, you need to speak in English here." And this is one memory from when I was 3 years old. It's yeah.
That's
I
funny.
think, so I always just kind of knew that at home we speak in Gujarati, at home we eat Indian food, but out of the house we don't have to, because I also happened to go to a school where I was probably one of only about 5 Indian people in that primary
Wow.
school. Majority of the people in that primary school were obviously, in New Zealand we call them Pākehā, which is Caucasian.
Right.
Couple of Chinese, couple of other ethnicities, but majority white. So all my friends in primary school were white. And I remember kind of explaining to them how things in my
Yeah.
household, and they never quite understood that we spoke a different language at home and we ate different food at home. But
Right.
they also thought it was cool. No one ever was like, oh, yeah, no one ever looked at it in a bad way. They just
That
thought it was
way, right.
cool and different that I did completely different stuff at home. Like my mom would make roti and sak every day. And
Right.
yeah, and I also digress a bit, but I remember, obviously Indian people don't use a knife and fork to eat their dinner. We, use our hands and roti and rice and stuff. I remember once I went to a friend's house for dinner. I don't know how old I was, maybe 7 or 8. And, her family eat with a knife and fork. And I just looked and I was like thinking in my head, I don't know what hand to pick up the knife with. And I didn't want my friend to think I was stupid, so I just carefully looked at what they all did, and then I just copied.
Covered.
And then when I came home after that dinner, I said to my mum, "I learned how to use a knife and fork today." And oh, that was funny, and then I told my friend years and years later, I said to her, "Your house was where I learned how to use a knife and fork?" And she said, "Oh, I
Wow.
didn't know that." Yeah, but, that's just a funny example.
Y
But in terms of, I guess, in terms of what my parents actually did to make sure that me and my brother upheld our culture was, A, the thing with my foy living with us, which was actually just by chance, that
Yeah.
she'd wanted to settle down in New Zealand and she was living with us, so that's just how it was. But I think it was also kind of by design, because as I've got older, I have spoken to my parents about it. I've asked them, why did you guys decide that at home we speak Gujarati? And my dad said, well, he said, you were always going to learn English once you start kindergarten and school anyway.
Yeah.
But if we don't speak Gujarati at home, where are you going to learn Gujarati from?
Yeah.
Because my dad's family all live in India and other parts of the world. He has no family in New Zealand. And because my mum's family has been in New Zealand for so many generations, they can speak and understand Gujarati, but English just comes more naturally to them also. They speak to each other in English. So my dad actually used to pretend that he didn't understand English if I ever tried to talk to him in English, so that my brain as a child would actually think, if I want to have a conversation with my dad, it has to be in Gujarati, otherwise he's not going to understand
Yeah.
me. And by the time I was old enough to realize, hold on, he does know English because he talks to the customers at the shop in English. By the time my brain figured that out, I was already pretty fluent in Gujarati.
Yeah.
My
And I
parents
guess
also
once you learn it at the younger
yeah,
age, it's easier. Then even though you don't use it in everyday life, you still know it. Like my kids, they speak in English 90, well, I would say 95% of the time. But if they have to speak in Gujarati, they can speak in Gujarati now. So, because that's not something they'll forget, they still
exactly.
know. And they might forget a here and there a word or two, like trying to remember what is this called in Gujarati. But other than that, they can speak fluently in Gujarati.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
helps. It helps. So
Yeah.
coming back to your grandparents, I know your grandmother's struggles deeply impacted you. And tell us a little bit about how did that experience shape your understanding of mental health, and share us a little bit about her story as well.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a bit of a trigger warning on this section, I guess. So this is my mum's mum. So the New Zealand grandparents,
Hmm.
let's say. My grandma, Ajiba, as I used to call her, she tried to commit suicide when I was 15, and I think she would have been back then early 60s. I think quite a young grandma because back then
Right.
people had kids a lot younger in life, and it impacted me a lot because so these grandparents, my mum's parents, lived less than 10 minutes away from me my whole life. They literally lived 2 suburbs away. So I used to go to their house so many times a week. And
Right.
when my parents were busy in their shop, my mum would drop me off to my grandparents' house because my ajiba didn't work. So, she was a homemaker. So she was basically like my second mum. I spent
Mhm.
so much time with her. I used to love going there for sleepovers and everything in the weekends and the school
Right.
holidays. And when this happened, when I was 15, I mean, yeah, okay, I was 15, but I never saw the signs in her. I never realized that she had any mental health problems because to me, she was just like anyone else in the family, really. And when this happened, so it was during I had exams that week at school, and so my parents didn't tell me that she'd done this until after my exams had finished. It's quite horrific, so delete this out if it's too horrific to go into the final edit of the podcast. But she was at home and she tried to burn herself over the gas stove in their kitchen. And she was home alone when she did this because my granddad still used to work. And my mum used to go like have coffee, chapani as they call it, with
Mhm.
her, kind of every day. If my papa was at work, my mum would always go in the afternoons to, catch up with her and spend time with her. So my mum was actually the one who found her because my mum had gone and, she went in and my Ajiba had somehow gone from the kitchen back to her bed. Don't know how she managed to walk back after she'd done what she'd done, but she was unconscious in her bed and my mum found her there and her face was all burnt. So, fast forward, my mum called my papa, my mama, who also lives nearby, went to hospital, and yeah, that's when they realized
So
she was
none
not
of the
right.
family members, I know you were quite young, but did the family members ever think that there was a health issue, the mental health issue here,
Yeah.
or
So, after my parents told me that she'd done this, the first thing I asked was, "How did how did your family let her get this bad?"
to this point?
Because
Yeah.
if you guys knew she had depression, why why was no one helping?
Hmm.
And I remember so vividly as a 15-year-old, I was just like, if I knew, I would have done everything I could to try and help. But I didn't know, and I was too, I don't know, I didn't know what the signs were. And my mum told me, she said, I've known for a very long time that your mom's had depression. And she said to me, why do you think I go over to Ajiba's house every day to have japani with her? She said, because I know how lonely your Ajiba gets. I do everything I can to keep her company, talk to her, listen to her about whatever's in her mind. She said, I've always tried. She said, now you know why I go over there as often as I do. And she said,
Yeah.
but other people in the family, she said, I can't control what other people in the family do and don't do. If other people's lives are too busy to care about her, what can we do about that? Nothing.
Yeah. So do you think that the conversation about the mental health are still difficult in our community, in our South Asian families?
Yes, definitely. So this was 2003 that my Ajiba tried to do this. And the conversations that our family had, the conversations my immediate family had were easy between my mum, dad, me, and my brother. I mean, my brother at that time was only 9. So, there's very limited things he understood. But as he got older, he asked questions and we could tell him. But the extended family kind of just wanted to put it under the carpet and forget about it, to say very lightly. And I know my mum tried to talk to the extended family about it because my mum's got a lot of extended family in Wellington because, born here. And they all tried to downplay it.
Mm,
And I would be like, how do you downplay the fact that someone tried to kill themselves? You can't
mm,
downplay that. You
yeah.
have to listen to what that person went through because it got to this point. And I know because obviously it was a failed suicide attempt, she was in hospital for quite a while afterwards because she needed to have lots of skin grafts on her face. She used to have long, long black hair, longer than yours.
Mm,
They had to shave all her hair off because she needed skin grafts everywhere on her face, neck, shoulders. They had to do surgery after surgery, shave all her hair off. Her speech was quite altered after that because her mouth was all burnt. And then my papa, mum, mama, and Masi all combined decided, well, and I think even the doctors recommended that she can't actually come back home because she tried to do this at home, which means she can't really be left on her own at home. And even if she is, what if you leave her alone for 5 minutes, she could do anything.
right.
So I think with the doctor's recommendations, they decided that she has to be put into 24/7 psychiatric care.
Mm,
So she was admitted to the psychiatric unit at Wellington Hospital as a long-term patient, basically for the rest of her life.
mm.
And I remember we used to go and visit her almost every week, and it was so traumatic, basically
It is very
knowing that
traumatic.
she was in this hospital with, and this is what the public would call crazy people. And I was like, "Oh my god, my grandma's one of them." My and I was like, "She raised me." Like,
Yeah,
I used to love hanging out with her. And the thing is, she wasn't crazy. She
yeah,
wasn't crazy, she was lonely. And
yeah. She just needed help, and
yeah,
that's what it was.
and I've had so many conversations with my mum about this. I'm so thankful my mum is an open book. My mum is not a typical Indian, "Oh, the bad thing happened, let's put it in the cupboard and
In the
lock
cupboard
the
and
door."
show it. Yeah.
If I have any questions, my mum will always sit down and we'll have a good chat about it. And I've asked her many times that, how did Ajiba feel this lonely when you guys have so much family in Wellington? Literally 15-minute drive from each other. And she said, my mum told me, look, your Ajiba moved to New Zealand when she was 17 or 18, when she married my Bapa. So Bapa's from New Zealand, but Ajiba was from India because arranged marriage.
Mhm,
And she said Ajiba moved here when she was like 18 for her husband.
mhm.
Rest of her family's all in India. She left all her family to come here for Baba. And Baba was, from what I know, great husband, great father, great provider, everything. He was an amazing granddad to me as well. But Ajiba obviously missed her own family back in India. And in the 1960s, you can't just ring someone or FaceTime. Didn't
Yeah,
exist, right?
yeah.
And she became really close to my Bapa's mum, so her
Mm,
mother-in-law, and they lived as a joint family back then. So her and Bapa's mum were like mother and daughter.
wow.
Ajiba found a second mother in her mother-in-law, luckily.
That's so nice. That
It
is so
was.
nice.
It was. But then when my Bapa's mum passed away, and I don't know exactly when she passed away, but I think it was around the late 1970s.
Mm,
That's when my Ajiba felt like she'd lost her mum
yeah.
all over again. And my mum told me that was when Ajiba's mental health really took a
Mm,
decline. And she had severe depression basically from then for the rest of her life. She was on antidepressants for pretty much from the 1980s until the time she passed away.
mm,
And even though my Bapa has 3 sisters here in Wellington, and Ajiba was really close to them, but at the same time, their upbringings were so different because Bapa and his
mm.
sisters grew up in New Zealand. My Ajiba didn't. So there were still these differences, and also, and this is not uncommon of Indians in the 1960s, but my Bapa was the provider of the family, so he didn't want Ajiba finding a job. He didn't want her working. She also never learnt to drive because I think back then a lot of women just didn't.
Just
It was the
yeah, just
husband
didn't
did everything.
yeah.
So she never learnt to drive, never got a job. I mean, financially, she didn't need a job, but it was more, I think,
It's
she
just
didn't
going
get
out and meeting people and feeling,
she
because
didn't have that sense of independence, and she was always
right,
reliant. She was reliant on my papa or my mom or my mama or someone to take her if she needed to go somewhere, someone would have to drive her there. She
right,
couldn't just get in the car and go herself, and
yeah.
little
And those little things causes,
they add up.
yeah, they add up,
Totally
they add
not.
up.
Like, when you look at one individual thing, you think, "Oh, that's not a bad thing. That's not bad." But it's
Yeah,
all of that combined together, and then I think it really hit her the most by the time all of her kids moved out of home. So my mum's the oldest of 3, so she obviously moved out first when she got married, and then mama, and then Masi, and then it was just her at home because
yeah,
my papa was still working part-time even after he'd retired. He was still working part-time just because he loved working and he loved his colleagues and stuff, and my Ajuba would just be at home, I guess, alone with her thoughts, to put
yeah.
it simply.
That's where all the problems start, where they're just lonely, and that's where all the depression and anxiety and all that starts. Now, talking about yourself, I know that you endured years of verbal and emotional abuse, from family, in-laws, and what gave you the strength to keep moving forward, and how did you cope with, that kind of a situation?
Yeah, yeah, it's quite I think it's one of those things where you don't really choose if you want to get through it or not, you kind of just have to.
Mhm.
E Ever since I saw, my Ajiba go through what she did, I've had a very big understanding of depression and mental health issues. I've actually suffered from depression on and off since I was about 12,
Mm,
which I then later realized once I knew everything Ajiba had gone through, I actually realized depression can actually be genetic as well.
mm.
There's a lot we can do to make our environments better for ourselves, but you can't always change your genetics. And after I saw what she went through, I noticed a lot of the signs in my mum and myself as well. So, my mum and me, we do everything we can to have a busy, active, happy life, but you always remember the genetics are there, the genetics are there. And I guess, I don't know, like seeing, I don't know how to put it this way, but after what my Ajiba went through, my mum's side of the family actually broke up because
Mm,
people didn't wanna admit the part they had played in it,
mm.
I guess, because it was too hard. Too hard, and I guess, people don't wanna be guilty for things. And when I know my mum tried to talk to quite a lot of the extended family about what Ajiba had been through and that, we need to be there for her now, we need to keep her company, make her feel less alone, and people are like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we will," and then
Yeah,
you see how much they're actually putting it into practice. They're not,
yeah,
because
yeah,
their own lives are too busy. And a lot of the family actually just slowly stop talking to each other, start doing their own thing, and they actually started excluding my family out of a lot of things. My mum started being excluded out of a lot of things that our
yeah,
extended family did. And we would find out, Facebook exists. We would see photos, and I'd say to mum, "Did we get invited to this?" She'd say, "No, I didn't know about this." Slowly started realizing, oh, it's because my mum's the one bringing up the elephant in the room. My
mm,
mum is the one that when, she talks to them because everyone forgets that it was my mum's mum that did this.
yes,
So, what did my mum go through when her own mother tried to take her own life?
mm,
And when my mum tried to talk, my papa always listened. He always listened. And I think he did everything he could to help my ajuba, honestly.
yeah,
But other extended family members, aunties, uncles, and stuff, they would all say, look, Ajiba was just the way she is. She's just the way she, and it's like, no, that's not it. Sometimes you have to listen to her thoughts and you can't just
Right.
say, oh, whatever, whatever. You have to listen and understand. If
Yeah.
she says she feels lonely, she's not just saying that for a joke. And I think, after that, people kind of started excluding my mom. And then as a result, me, my dad, my brother also get excluded from things. And I guess I don't know, maybe that's just how sometimes Indian people are. When things are too hard, you gotta put it behind you and ignore it, and
It,
you put on a happy face for the rest of society. So
yeah.
that
Yeah.
we kind of went through that for a few years, and my Ajuba actually passed away 3 years later when I was 18, but she passed away from complications from a knee surgery. So completely
Mhm.
unrelated to mental,
Wow.
completely unrelated, but she for those 3 years between the attempted suicide attempt and when she actually died, every time we used to see her, she just used to say, "I wish I was dead. I wish I was dead. I wish I had actually killed myself." That's all that
Sad.
she didn't
That
want
is
she
so sad.
didn't yeah, she didn't wanna be alive at all.
So,
And
looking at your experience and, the
mm,
family dynamics and everything, what advice you would give to women who feels like they're trapped between respecting the family, protecting their own well-beings, and at the same time actually thinking about your family's mental health? What would you say?
yeah. I think the conversations definitely need to be had, because if
Yeah.
you don't have the conversation, then you don't know what other people around you are thinking, right? But
Right.
as well as that, without sitting down and talking about what's actually happening, how do you help someone or how do you move forward as a family? And like, a lot of ethnic people that migrate to Western countries, they go through a lot of mental health problems because
They
you've
do.
literally left your family and the whole life that you know in one
Mhm.
country. And in this case, you've literally moved to the other side of the world. New Zealand could not be any further away from India. And, especially in the 1960s and 70s, you don't just have the technology to talk to your family. You have to build a whole new life in a new country, in an uncommon language,
Yeah.
everything. And people just keep thinking, oh, we just have to do this and this and this. And then along the line, their thoughts and feelings just get ignored. But if we don't talk about it, it's going to continue being ignored.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
there has to be a middle ground where, like, no one is being blamed for what happens, but let's talk about it.
Talk
Let's
about it. Yeah.
talk about our thoughts, our feelings, or what someone else in our family went through and address it. So hopefully this doesn't happen to anyone else in our
Anyone
family or
else.
anyone
Yeah.
in our circle. I think it has to be done
Also,
that.
it has to be like the signs, like, like for your grandma example, there were a lot of signs missed, or even like your mom knew about it, but there could have been, if there was an open conversation, you think there would have been a better situation or a better way of dealing with it. And this would not have been the end result of it.
Exactly. And I think, like, when I've spoken to mum, because this was more than 20 years ago now when this happened, but when I've spoken to mum, I've asked her back then, I'm like, what did you used to do about it since you knew Ajiba was depressed? And Bapa knew she was depressed. My mama and Masi knew she was depressed as well. I said, what did you guys actually do about it? And she said, I used to spend as much time as I could with your Ajiba. Ajiba needed to go somewhere. If Bapa was at work, I would come and pick her up and take her. And she said, I used to tell Baba and other people in the family that Ajiba's feeling like this, or she said this. And she said, but if people don't take it seriously, what can we do? She said, I took it seriously and I did what I could. And so I think
Yeah.
it's all like that, you can't tell other people what to do, but you do the best you can as well.
Right.
And after, I guess, after all of that, like, I mean, yeah, it's hard because when you see someone in your family, and this is from my point of view, when you see someone in your family go through all this stuff when you're really young, you feel really helpless.
Yeah.
I so my parents, when she attempted suicide, I think they told me about 4 days afterwards because I was in the middle of exams at school when it
Mhm.
happened. So they must have decided we'd tell her after the exams are over. I felt so helpless because I was like, "What? What? Like, since when does she have depression?
Unbelievable, right?
Have I
Yeah.
done something wrong? And have I been a bad grandchild?" Like, and because I'm her oldest grandchild by quite a lot, so After me, it's my brother who's 6 years younger than me, and then after him, we've got 4 cousins who are even younger than my brother. So
Right.
I was her oldest grandchild by quite a few years. I was like, "What could I have done to make sure she didn't go through? Should I have done more? Should I have spent more time with her?" And obviously, my parents were like, "No, that's not your fault at all. You haven't done
Yeah.
anything wrong." But then, just since then, I have always been a huge advocate for mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't like
And
it when
and
people.
and I hear that you also have your own podcast.
Yeah,
It's called the Coconut Chats.
yeah, yeah.
So
So I
tell
have.
us a little bit about that. How is this is the reason that it inspired you to start it, or
Yeah, so this was one of the reasons, seeing what my Ajiba went through and what my family went through as a result of her was one of the reasons.
you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so as has all of the situations you know, helped you heal or find your voice with your podcasting?
It definitely has. It has.
And is are there conversations, or I'm just curious what kind of conversations or what kind of topics you bring up in your podcast
Yeah.
as well?
So, I have 2 podcasts. The first one I started is called Coconut Chats, and I know it's got a bit of an odd name, but I'll explain the basis of the name. The word coconut came from the fact that, so I actually started that with 2 Indian friends that live in Melbourne, and the word coconut came from the fact that the 3 of us are brown-skinned, but living in predominantly what we call white
Right.
Western culture
Oh, wow.
in Melbourne, New Zealand, so that our insides are like that mix of Indian and Western, but our outsides are brown.
Proud.
That's how the word coconut came up, and we thought it's a funny play on words, and also
Yeah.
chat because our conversations are very like, like friends chatting.
Mhm.
We interview different guests from around the world, all Indian guests, Indian, Sri Lankan ethnic guests, really,
Right.
about their inspirational journeys in life. So we started that podcast in 2020, actually, during one of the COVID lockdowns.
Mhm.
And so I had been friends with these 2 ladies from when I lived in Melbourne, but I actually moved back to New Zealand in 2019. But we thought, oh, this would be a fun project to start during lockdown, especially when we're all stuck at home. Let's
Yeah.
start a podcast. We can all talk about whatever's on our mind, whatever, whatever. Let's see what.
Right.
And then, so the reason that my reason for starting that podcast, I obviously can't speak for my 2 co-hosts, but my reason for starting that podcast was because Indian people, and I'm sure everyone, but a lot of Indian people go through so much stuff that they are told to not talk about
Yeah.
because to keep it in the house or something really bad happens, i.e., like narcissistic abuse,
Mhm.
family problems, or, a family member trying to commit suicide. Just keep it in the house because if we talk about it publicly, society will shame us. There's
Yeah.
this
And
there's
that
this
is yeah.
mentality.
And see, that is exactly the reason Global Desi Women started is because we wanted to bring out these kind of stories and be heard so that it gets inspiration to other women around the world because like you said that our voices need to be heard, our experiences need to be heard, and it makes if it gets from our experiences somebody else is learning something, or if like you said for mental health, if somebody else's life has been saved by listening to our podcast and saying thinking, hey, before something bad happens, let me take some actions to save this person's life, then hey, we've done our job, and that's exactly the reason we wanted to and we do
Exactly.
what we do. So
Yeah.
it's very nice. I'm really happy to hear that you do this, and I
Yeah.
guess you also have what it's called as Wahine.
Yeah. So it's called Conversations with Wahine. So you've probably never heard the word wahine before because that's a
It's
Maori word.
New
So
Zealand.
Maori is
Yeah,
they're the people that were in New Zealand before the British took over, basically. They're the native
right.
New Zealanders. So
Yeah.
Maori is that language, and wahine means woman in Maori.
Mm,
So that again, play on words, and also because Conversations with Wahine is a mostly New Zealand based radio show and podcast. And I started that in 2021. Again, kind of just by chance.
mm.
So I'm part of the National Council of Women New Zealand. I'm one of the executive members. And we have a local Wellington radio station called Wellington Access Radio. A lot of cities in New Zealand have local radio stations. And they had reached out to National Council of Women asking if people from our organization would be interested in starting a woman-based, feminist-based radio show. And at the time, I thought, "Oh, I don't mind giving it a go." I'm an accountant by profession. I don't know anything about the media, but I don't mind giving it a go and just seeing how it goes, kind
Yeah.
of pastime. And I said, as long as there are a few other women from the branch with me, because I don't want to do it on my own, I want to do it as a team. And also at the time, I was living like one street away from where that radio studio is. So I thought,
Mm.
well, then it's easy for me to get there and get home as well. That was actually the main reason I said I'd give it a go, because it was literally right by my apartment. And so, yeah, at the time, four of us started it. And we thought, instead of us four co hosts talking for every episode, why don't we interview a different guest each time?
Mm.
Then
Yeah.
we have a new person to talk to, new insights, because
Yeah.
our
You get to hear somebody else's
yeah,
voice, right?
our
So it's
guests
it's
range
nice.
from so many different walks of life. So
Mm.
now we've done almost 200 interviews now. I think we just released our 185th episode a few days ago.
Wow.
We've interviewed different, so many walks of life, politicians, authors, activists, actors, just all
Wow.
different walks of life. We've interviewed some men as well, but the questions we ask them are always a bit more feminist based, because all of
Right.
us co hosts, we're all women. So the questions are coming from us and what's on our
Oh.
mind. So our platform is open to men as well, but they all obviously know that the questions are more with a gender focus on them. Majority of our guests are from New Zealand, but we have interviewed some people from around the world as well. But when we interview some people from around the world, it's always with links back to New Zealand women. And again, I don't think I would have started these two podcasts if I hadn't been through what I had been through in the past. I
Right.
think, to be honest, I don't think I would have ever had an interest in starting a podcast about interviewing different people from all walks of life and their struggles and how they've got to where they are and their inspirational journeys
Yeah.
if I hadn't have been through all the stuff I've mentioned to you in the past.
Yeah.
I think I
But
would have just been like, "Oh, yeah, cool, that's for someone else."
that's the thing, right? That you actually chose voice over what had, over the trauma that you've gone through. And so it has helped you become more stronger and have a better, you kind of built those two platforms for other people to come and talk about it as well. So it's very inspiring. Thank you so much. And it's very touching. And it's the courage that you have and the honesty of sharing your vulnerability and to the world. And I wish you all the best and hope that you get even more and more strength and your voice is heard more and more about it so other people can be aware of the mental health and be aware of the situation and also build the voice to speak up, right? So we're
Thank
very
you so much
grateful.
for having me.
Yeah, we're very grateful that you've shared your experiences with Global Desi Women today. And to all our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with everyone else and that needs the encouragement, hope, or inspiration. Remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and you're never alone. So thank you for tuning in to Global Desi Women. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay inspired, empowered, and keep making a difference in this world. Thank you.